Hi, I'm Jacob Eiting, CEO of RevenueCat. I'm the CEO of Series B 60-person company that helps developers make money with subscriptions in their apps. My history and background, so as a computer kid, became an engineer when I grew up, worked as an engineer for 10 years in Silicon Valley, and then decided to start a company because I had a chip on my shoulder. I always wanted to start a company. I had entrepreneurs in my family. Stuff like that. So yeah, about 5 or 6 years ago, I started this company RevenueCat with my friend Miguel, and started it as a let's see what this can be kind of thing. Didn't really have like world domination aspirations, but we just built something people wanted, I guess, and it started to slowly take off. And then I blinked and 3 years later we'd raised $50 million and I had 50 employees, and all these things had happened and my life was completely different. And now, yeah, and that's the world I'm in now. And I never would have guessed like all the bets, like if you were a betting person would have said, no, this is not where you will end up with this. Like, this is not the smart money would not have been on getting to this point, but hey, here we are. And so yeah, and now that's I don't know, that's shorter than 2 minutes. I think there's a lot of color I left out of that, but hopefully you can use it.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about it in such a effortless way, but I'm sure that journey was nothing.
I'm just trying not, I gotta keep some barriers up, right? We can't make this a full coaching session, but yeah, there's a lot to that journey in terms of transitioning from being an IC, being an engineer, being somebody who just likes to make things, learning how to we're getting deep already, find joy in being a CEO as a maker, and kind of rewiring what I get joy out of in work, because it's fundamentally different, but there are some similarities. And so that's been a big challenge of the last first couple of years of a startup are very much like being an IC. You're hacking, you're working on things, you're trying to build stuff, but then it transitions into company management, company building, and that was a big transition. And it's kind of how we met. That was when I needed a little bit of help, I think. So
What do you think you were facing with when we met?
So yeah, I guess there's this big transition that, I mean, we always talk about it, but there really is this before and after phase in company scaling. There's before, when you can kind of hold the social and emotional graph in your head of the whole company. You kind of have some idea who everybody is. You kind of have some idea of everybody's motivations. You kind of have some relationship with everybody at the company. And that allows you to manage in a very different way, right? Like, you can kind of just hold all the balls in the air at once. You can kind of have you don't need all these systems and delegation and layers and all this stuff. And then it happens very quickly. That falls off because the number of connections in the company goes up factorially. I feel like that wall happens so fast, somewhere between 20 and 50 people. Like, it just goes, wow. And it changes faster than you can possibly predict. And I think that's where I was. It changed. I hadn't recognized it changed. People had told me, but you didn't really expect it. And then you just kind of wake up one day and you just feel like everything you've learned, or not everything, but so much of what you learned is no longer fit for what the job is now. And so many of the fundamental physics of the work has changed, and there's just not enough time to adapt. You can read as much as you want, but it's really hard to make that switch intuitively. It takes, and that's what I found. And I think I don't know why I reached at the time when we started working together. I didn't know how bad it was, maybe. I didn't realize some of my habits and some of my my impulses and things like this were not well adapted for that post inflection point world. And I knew in my bones something was not right, but I didn't know what it was. And actually the journey had started earlier than that for me, because I had started a year before that, maybe when we were 20 people, so much earlier, with I talked to some coaches and they were like, actually, you need therapy. So I went and I did that first. And that was useful. But at some point then I felt okay, made a lot of progress, understanding my emotional self. It gave me a good basis. And that was what precipitated okay, let's try coaching again. Cause I do feel I didn't solve all of my emotional stuff, but I at least labeled a lot of it and kind of had a handle on some of it. And that was a good, for me at least, that was a good moment to like start coaching.
Right. And I remember when we met, you said like you are now ready to make changes to the company in like a bigger way than before. And I think the therapy journey made you ready to start to look at what has changed after the inflection point. And you talk about how it's a difficult transition. It's a transition that kind of hits you maybe cognitively first, but it really takes a lot to stomach it and understand what it really meant. So throughout that phase of transition, what was the hardest thing for you?
There's a bit of loss, like mourning, right? There's
Mhm.
some mourning of like this identity and self and person
Mm,
that you had before the company and like up through the like first phase of the company, which felt very natural to me. Like I felt very continuous person from the beginning through that phase. But then I felt to some degree like I wasn't going to be able to make that same person as it wasn't going to, and it sounds scary and true, but I think even down to things like values and things like this that I had carried and were very important to me, I had to reevaluate. And that comes to on things like just being, I never wanted to be like, I considered things like, let's talk about something like tactically, like a reorganizing company, deciding like, hey, my teams are not right. Like that is a thing that's like has immense human cost to it. Even if you do it well and it's for the best and whatever, it's like it's something that you're probably causing pain, discomfort, fear for people. But it's like a decision you have to make. And that's very hard to like carry those same wirings and values like up through that. And then there's like the meta of like, okay, like, is what I'm doing right? Is it wrong? Like there's just a lot to it. And so I think I forgot what your question was, but uh like well, yeah, what was particularly hard? Yeah, it's kind of coming to grips with that's just like you're gonna kind of have to reevaluate like if you want to keep doing this job. And I think if you want to stay, to use maybe not the best term, sane, like if you want to be able to like do it and maintain it, there's going to be things you have to put on the table. There's going to be things that you used to hold really dear that you maybe have to let go of, right? Like never hurting people, right? Like nobody ever wants to hurt somebody, but
right.
like sometimes you got to fire people, right? And like you don't have to. I guess you could just not, and you could but the cost would be maybe potentially your company, right? And sometimes it's not even that dire, right? I mean, it sounds very like tactical and like it sounds like, oh, like learning to fire people, okay, whatever, but it's heavy. Like I think it weighs on a lot of people really heavy, and like and it's just something you're gonna have to do a lot, right? And for me, it's like I never wanted to go so far where like that's a completely cold action, right? Where I'm just a completely dead-eyed shark, I think is the term I used to use like with you a lot. But also like in practicality, it's something I kind of has to happen, and it's just like a realistic part of the business. And if I had to find that, what parts of myself can I give up and what parts can I retain? And that's, on that side. And then, also just the work, the fact that I probably don't really get to code very much anymore. It's still kind of a bummer, but I find other stuff to do. That's fun. So
There's so many good nuggets here from what you just talked about, but also from what I know you, like it's really true to you that you care so much about people. And what in the beginning stages where the company was 20 people and you got to know everyone, that was very meaningful for you. So when it grew, there's first that sadness of we cannot be connected with each other the same way that we were. And then there's the identity of I was a builder, I was a maker, I just get in there and I get things done. But all of a sudden I have to be a manager, I have to make people decisions, I have to, like you said, some decisions that I do will have people cost. So it's almost like recreating that sense of self, right? And I know that you talked about, you just said letting go some parts of yourself, but it's also a reconnect of how do I find meaning in doing these hard decisions where I still maintain that part of my humanity, but understand it's different now. It's almost like growing up, and that's hard.
yeah. I mean, and you kind of have to like get through it. Like if you want to be able to both be able to sustain in the job and do a good job, you kind of have to.
Right.
And then also I don't think it's like, I don't think there's probably some people have no problem with this, right? There's probably some people that maybe this is their second time, or like, they're they were more fit for this. I just wasn't one of those folks. So like, and then, you know, I'm not there. I'm not saying like I've got it all figured out. Like it's still, making big decisions is still really hard, and stuff like this. And it should always be. But yeah, that was the big like skill set and change that, you know, I think we worked on in our like 6 or so months of doing coaching. Like, I think that was one of the big things that I got better at, was a process for identifying the big issues, kind of separating myself and my emotional self from it initially, and then figuring out the right way to reincorporate it. Right. And I can't say I have it perfect yet. But it's definitely been easier to operate with those tools than before, where it was like 90% emotion and like, you know, instinct and like all these things, right? Which like emotion and instinct are still a big part of decision making, right? But like doing it at a level where you're also, you know, collecting the data, and like you're also being like thoughtful, and like all that stuff takes skill, right? And maybe that's part of the transition. When it's small, you just kind of like shoot from the hip and it's fine. When you get bigger, it's like the consequences are serious, and so like you can't quite do that as quickly. But yeah, so yeah, it was a lot.
And behind all this, you also talked about there are moments of doubt of, can I do this? Am I going to make this? Am I going to be the right person leading the company? Which I think is very hard to speak about when you created this thing, but actually very common. I don't know if I've known anybody who hasn't had those thoughts. And even though you had those thoughts, you were able to learn different skill sets and different tools to anchor you where you are right now. And I hear you, I acknowledge that it's not perfect and you're still working, but it is different now. So different how? Tell me about like, what do you know about who you are today as a CEO?
Yeah, so in some ways I think I like through this process, like I think I've kind of, like you said, like kind of reconnected or brought forward aspects of myself that maybe had gotten like, you know, you go through this period of acceleration and it kind of like gets all crazy all at once. And then you kind of come back on the other side. Like once you get things, at least that's been my perception of it. And as things are getting crazier and faster and harder and you're getting less fit, like you start putting things aside, like, oh, I can't do this anymore. I can't do that anymore. Actually, some of it's like, I've been able to actually go like, hey, like those were really valuable skills that I put aside. Like maybe trusting my gut is like kind of something, but like, making those rapid decisions based on my experiences, and like knowing when I have something doesn't feel right, or like it's not like I'm just pulling it out of the air. It's like understanding that that's because of like a decade of experience and like a lot of experience at the company before. And sometimes it's just about writing down like, okay, so you don't feel good about this, like why? Like write down the why, and you start to put down into something, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, there's like 9 reasons why. I couldn't articulate them but I just knew, like my subconscious knew. And so yeah, so yeah, figuring out how to retranslate some of those like early founder skills into this world, like to live in this corporate world where like I don't do most things anymore. Like I delegate everything now, and like not giving up those, I'm gonna call them like, yeah, those like instincts that got me here, and like figuring out how to use those in this new context, right? Because it's different. Like I can't, the old days, I had an instinct to do something. I'd grab my editor, I'd write a piece of code and I'd ship it, right? Or I would like, you know, send an email to a customer, I'd like do a thing and I would just take it. Now I have to figure out like, okay, like there's an instinct, I've got a buzz, a shock, something I feel that needs to change. How do I translate that into action in the new world? That's like a technical skill, right? And like being able to bring that forward required those technical skills, like required my like understanding of how to like work within an organization and how to manage an executive team and like how to, you know, manage through people, right? And stuff like that. So again, forgot the question. Hopefully I answered it.
I think well, the question was, what do you know about yourself as a CEO now?
Okay. Yeah.
The answer was,
I guess it was that actually I wasn't, and then go back to your like fit question and doubt. Like, I think there's some discovery that, yeah, maybe I am kind of fit for this. I just needed to like figure out how to do it. Like I just had to learn the skills. There's some technical skills I had to learn to like
right,
be able to do it at this scale.
right. And the skills that you've learned, it sounds like it's making connections between previous skills you knew about before, and then figuring out how to delegate it, how to make them into action, and how to almost like teach other people how to do it. So it's a different um, layer of things that you're doing. The end goal is the same, but how you're doing it changed, and you
Which
train your brain to do that.
and having the confidence to like tell really fancy, smart, well-paid people that like what I think is right. And I think I need you to do it. So like, I think I need you to take this like, and help me execute it like this. Right. Like, obviously I don't micromanage everything, but once in a while there's like a thing I'm like, hey, we need to do it this way. And having that confidence, I think I didn't have that confidence for those like middle years to like override or say like this doesn't feel right and stuff like that. And like, you don't want to do that for everything. Like you want an executive team and a team that can like largely execute autonomously, but once in a while it's really important for the founder to come in or the CEO to come in and be like, okay, man, we need to course correct here. Like I'm, based on all my experience and everything, like I think this needs to change. And like
Right.
that just takes it's confidence, right? And
Right.
feeling good about it.
Right. And you have more and more certainty around your strong opinions and when to use those strong opinions. And I think we talked about this of you staying ahead of almost what the company is focusing on. There's like a time frame, and you're
Yeah.
what would my team look like? What would strategy look like? What would all these things look like? And then now you can come back to the present moment and say, okay, this needs to change because I see all of these other things that we may not be
And
focused
that's
on.
a big change. Like, you go as a founder from very operating in the moment, right? You're not like next quarter, like, come on, no, we're not thinking about next quarter. I remember like in the early days, folks talking about like wanting to be involved in like strategy and long range planning. And I'm like, long range planning is the end of the month. Like that's as far as we're planning, right? Like every month is a new chapter and we're just going to build and build and build. But then that's one of those things that breaks down suddenly because now you have like groups of people that need marching orders and need the coordination and like you need to raise your vision. And this was a big project for me in the last quarter, like the second half or last quarter of last year. I was like, I need to go from looking 6 to 12 months in ahead, which is already something, to
Right.
like 36 months ahead. Like I need to be looking years out, 5 years out. And like, yeah. And then once you do that, you're right. Then you have like you can look down the road a ways. You can communicate that too to your team. They don't have to think about it on a daily basis, but you can say like, hey, like here's where I'm thinking. And so you got one person looking out to the horizon, and then you've got like your executive team thinking a little bit closer to the horizon. And then that's where that like annoying visionary term or whatever comes from, like the CEO having the vision. It's like, yeah, the CEO should be looking out
Yeah.
ideally a little bit further than everybody else.
Yeah.
If nothing else, just to like help build a coherent like group, right? Of doing like of a coherent business that's like moving in a direction, right?
Right. Right. And I think the fact that you're able to keep your eyes on that longer horizon is because you have a unit that's working really well in the closer time.
Yeah. I mean, you have to have, yeah, the day to day figured out, right?
Right.
Like that's a privilege of building a good team, right? I
Yeah.
think. And that
So
doesn't happen overnight, right?
yeah.
So
So how did you do it? What do you think are the steps that you took to build the team, the leadership team you have today?
I think leadership teams are interesting. People always talk about like versions of leadership teams. And I think that starts at the very beginning. Like you start your first version of your leadership team 0.0 is your founders, right? And then there's usually like the 1.0, which is like, because you don't need like in the very, very early days, you don't need VPs. You don't need people with like crazy. I mean, some people do it, but like it's not a super clean fit to hire like really seasoned execs really, really early. It can go poorly for a lot of reasons. And so you're identifying like who in the company do I trust and is like can bat above their weight or hit above their weight and is I think can like kind of own a function. And so you're kind of just like picking people to own things that aren't really necessarily executives. They wouldn't call themselves executives, but they're like smart and they care and they're like ride or dies. And you're like, okay, you're going to run this, you're going to run this. And then kind of it organically evolved from that. Like I had a few people that I was like, okay, you're working on growth and customer stuff. You're working on marketing, like and then at some point I like formalized those into like head of roles and things like this to like kind of create like, okay, we actually have a staff. So that was kind of like, it kind of organically evolved from like
Mhm.
DRIICs to like, okay, now I'm going to like kind of call this a staff or an executive team. And that was like somewhere around our Series A maybe.
Mhm.
And then that's kind of like your first organic team. And then you're kind of always just like looking at, okay, who am I bringing in next? And like, where's the biggest, it's like a weakest point, not to like say a single person, but there's always like a company, or there's like some combination of team, timing, all these things that make for like, okay, this is our biggest need right now. It's like, we need to level up here or there. And then it's just a process of like constantly kind of like, and it's a challenging thing, because you either got to remove somebody from your executive team, or you got to like hire them a new boss. And if you have really good people that you really trust and trust you, like often you can have that like, hey, let's go and hire you your dream boss.
Mhm.
And I've had that work a couple times. That's been good.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a hard conversation. Ideally, you've built the trust. Ideally, and this is like a little bit inside baseball, but it's true for me too. Is like, if you let somebody go a little bit longer till they see the cracks as well as you see the cracks, and then the conversation, if they're like drowning, because it's like, yeah, it's hard to be out of your element, right? It's hard to be doing something you've never done before at a company that's scaling pretty fast. And like, it feels bad not to be on top of everything. And ideally, you just hired people who are really self-aware as well. That helps a lot. So that's kind of the and I would say that's escaping that like very V0 team to that V1 executive team. And basically you'll just kind of go through this like build up as you kind of go like, okay, it's time to bring in somebody who knows the next scale better and this stage. And like, we're probably, I'd say, somewhere right now between V1 and V2 of the executive team. Like, we're kind of bringing in, we've got some heads, we've got some VPs, which is interesting in itself. Because I think once you're at a stage where you're fully at like all VPs, all seasoned, like super, like that's a different game in itself. Kind of being in the halfway point where I've got folks that are stretching into roles, and I've got like seasoned outside VPs as well. It's kind of creates an interesting dynamic, but I don't think there's a way around that. I think it's just something you have to manage, but you can have like really great folks on those different levels and can function. My experience, function really well as an executive team. Like, you can have folks that are like super seasoned and really know their stuff, and you can have folks that are kind of stretching and kind of first time in the leadership room, and it works as long as like, your VPs are nice to, you know what I mean? They're like not like real pretentious or anything like this. And that's personality, right? That's personality screening, and just making sure that like who you're hiring, you're going to work well with, your executive team is going to work well with, like, and that matter. I think that's one thing I found too in building a team that I feel is pretty, I feel pretty good about, is just like making sure you like them to some degree, right? Like, you have to spend a lot of time with these people, and like, you're going to have to be more candid with them than you might be with you want to be able to be more candid with them. You want to feel like you can really truly trust them. And if it's somebody that you just grind your gears, you don't get along with, like, you don't, on like some personal level, like, I think that's that can make it really challenging
Yeah.
to even do the work well, right? So yeah, I don't know. I won't say I haven't, there's not optimizations that could be made, but yeah, you said it at the top of this call. You're like, I think you built a really good exec team. And I'm like, yeah, like, as a founder, I like never feel like anything I've ever done is good, right? So I'm
Oh,
always like, yeah, no, it's fine. Like, we've got problems, like, it could be worse. It's kind of like the best compliment you'll get out of me is like, it could be worse. But yeah, not thinking about it. Yeah, I'm very fortunate, especially when I talk to other founders that have not gone through this process yet and don't have the leverage. Because now,
right.
like, going back to that, looking forward 5 years, like, you can't do that until you've delegated 90% of your work, right?
Exactly.
And it really does help the business to have a founder now freed up to be looking a little bit further, to be flexible, like, to be able to run around and like focus on the biggest bottleneck in the business at any given time, and not necessarily be having to run 3 functions simultaneously.
I mean, I agree with you. Probably could be worse. It could be better, but yeah, you've built a team that you can delegate to. And there's some specific points that I want to ask you a little bit more about, but I like the V0 to V1 and V1.5. I think your definition of V2, where you're headed towards, eventually it would all be VPs, right? At that level. So
Yeah, basically, and they've all led in an executive capacity. They've managed, they're very effective hirers, very effective firers, very effective like strategic leaders, and stuff like this, like really folks that you don't have to manage, if that makes sense. Like, you kind
right.
of give them very broad direction, and you help them in their, you help them as they need it, but it's like somewhat peer relationship, and it's like, it's just different from, that's another big transition. You go from managing like ICs and all this stuff, you learn all those skills, and then managing an executive team is a very different
Yes.
game. Yeah.
I think now you're speaking to is maybe an unconscious competence of yours, because when you're describing these stages, you're not only describing the looks of the team, but you're describing the nature of how I would interact with them. And sometimes founders forget. They think, okay, I've got this type of people, but you also have to be very clear about, when I have these people come in, this is how we're going to interact with each other. And your preference would be, I give you something really broad and you take it and run. And it's almost a very light touch type of relationship.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you get the most leverage, right? Is when it's, and if you don't, I think this applies top to the bottom of like levels and stuff too, is if you don't have some degree of that, you probably staring at a misfit hire, or somebody's in the wrong role, you're in the wrong role, they're in the wrong role, they're doing the wrong, something's not right, right?
Yeah.
Like if you don't feel that like somewhat ease.
Yeah.
And I think that took a while too, as a manager. I mean, this is my most management I've done has been at RevenueCat as well. So like, learning that if something like, it goes back to like trusting your gut, is like something feels wrong, like the relationship feels strained, it feels difficult, start looking at the data, because it's oftentimes like, once you don't feel like it's right, go look at like, okay, what are the actual interactions, what is the actual output, and like suddenly it's pretty, a lot of
Mhm.
times pretty clear, like, oh yeah,
Okay.
there's something here, right?
Okay.
Takes a while to learn that skill as well.
Yeah, I mean, let's see if we can break it down a little bit so other people can learn it, because you have a very particular profile that you're looking for. Self-aware, you said, not pretentious, work well with others, and then people that you like. And there's a huge trust component. You find people that you can trust, and they trust you, even if you find them a good boss. So maybe let's start with the trust piece. How do you screen for someone you can trust?
I like people that will tell you things that like others might, people that are somewhat unguarded, tells me two things. One is they're trusting, and then they're going to trust me with some information, and like it's bi-directional, right? Like if I give you if I trust you with something, it's because if I tell you something that's like vulnerable, it's probably because I trust you, and then that's a good way for us to build trust, because then I feel like I can also share something, right? And so yeah, so like when I meet with folks, and I can kind of immediately, we can talk very plainly, and share, that's a big sign, like, okay, like I think yeah, like potentially this is a relationship where we could build trust. And then how you like react, and how you carry transparency, right? So I think one thing is, and it's really hard to screen for this, like in a, like while you're interviewing somebody outside, typically it's pretty easy to tell when somebody's in, but folks that are, I always tell people when they start, like one of the things in my, I think I've written in my, like, here's your like first day Jacob guidebook. I'm like, don't let me tell you the bad news, right? Like that will go a long way. If you tell me what the bad news is on your team, or what's the bad things that are going on, that's going to build a lot of trust with me, right? Because I know you're not trying to just angle with me. I know you're not just trying to like make me happy and like make you look good. Like I know you're actually here, because like our job is not celebrating wins. We celebrate wins because it feels good and it's dopamine and it helps keep us motivated. But like our job is to prevent losses, right? Like we're like, what is the bad news? Like where's the company failing, and how do we address that, right? Like, and so folks that, and sometimes this shows in like, you know, when somebody's talking about their past experience and stuff like this, if somebody tells me like, oh, you know, I love, and somebody tells me they like sucked, or like they got fired, or like whatever, they have like some like negative story that's like, yeah, I wasn't a good fit for this job, and like it fell apart, and like I didn't have a good relationship with the CEO, blah, blah, blah. They give me to be straight. I'm like, okay, that tells also that self-awareness thing, right? Like they're able to like know themselves and know their, you know, tell a like somewhat even-handed narrative about themselves, as opposed to somebody who's like, you know, and I don't think it's that hard to tell when somebody's like trying to give you the like the soft version, the political version of it, right? And I like that in people. Like I like somebody who can kind of tell it to me straight, isn't afraid to admit their faults and failures, and like isn't so, because like if somebody's so hinged on you thinking they're great, I do not want to hire people that need me to think they're great. like, or need me to like be their confidence builder. Like we'll be friends and like, I will tell you when you're doing great work, but like, I can't rely on you. Like you can't rely on me to be your like confidence builder. Like that's not going to work. I need somebody who's kind of like self-motivated and kind of derives their own value, right? And loves what they do. And like sees it as like, I have this company, I have a bundle of interesting problems and I think you can help us get a lot of good wins. Like, do you want to come and work on that? Right. That's the kind of energy I look for in recruiting.
Let's say you get someone like this indoors and you're working with them. How do you build trust with them so that you can hire their bosses or change them around and they still feel motivated?
And this is the thing that's gotten harder to do at scale. I can do it on my team, but is it building that genuine connection, right? Like knowing about you, your family, how you're feeling, like that kind of stuff, like having and showing genuine care for the person, right? And then I think also just making sure that you both care about the company first. I don't know what to call it first, but like you both genuinely care about the mission and the company. Like, I guess that's not a way to build trust, but like if we kind of like if we both know that what matters most is the success of the company, our customers and the mission, then like it's a lot easier to assume good intentions. If I believe that your intentions are for the best of the business and so are mine, there will be disconnects there, but like it smooths over a lot of things, right? Because it's like, infighting becomes suddenly like zero sum. And like, there's all this stuff that like just comes off the table because you're like, is this helping our customers? And I think that's part of it. It's like, hey, like, but yeah, but ultimately, I don't know, just being charming, I guess, just like trying, just, and then like, I guess I throw a lot of mud on my face. Like when I make mistake, like I show people I try to be vulnerable and like honest and direct and transparent. Like I share a ton. We share all of our metrics, all of our ups and downs. I've started in the last year sharing like a weekly email at the end of the week where I'm just like, hey, like, here's how I'm feeling. Like, here's the concerns I have right now. I'm thinking about, and there's 99% of what's going on I can share pretty candidly. And so I guess people don't, it's like the Stephen King used to say like the scariest thing in horror is like a closed door, right? Because like, and then when you open the door, no matter if it's like a giant monster or like nothing, like no matter what, it's less scary once you've opened the door. So I just try to keep the doors open, right? Like try to keep the information flowing, try to keep my thinking. And sometimes it bites me because I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm thinking like maybe we need to, change this up or something. And then I don't realize like, oh yeah, that could have pretty heavy consequences to a person or a team or like all this stuff. And that uncertainty can be unsettling for people. But like, I find those happen. How often that happens is a cost that's like probably okay. So just keep it in control for the benefit you get from being open and kind of sharing. And, I try to get people to understand that like things come out of Jacob's mouth, unless I put them on a slide and do it at all hands, like it's probably just an idea, right? It's probably just a thought or a consideration. Cause I want people thinking that way too. Like I want them looking at the business, like, and being like, what can change or what's, broken and stuff like this.
So in the way you're just modeling, by modeling transparency, you're training people how to think and you're inviting new ideas. And you've created a company where you are your whole self. You're like, you create this human to human connection with your vulnerability and the way you care about people. You invite them to be their whole self. And probably you wouldn't even hire someone if they're super polished and only talk about work and they come to the company, try to get some kind of resume builder and leave. You're looking for those, that mission alignment. As long as mission wise, we're aligned, we're going to care about you. We're going to be in this together. And I'm an open book almost.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think maybe sounds coherent.
I mean, I think a lot of things that you're doing is, again, like maybe also just unconscious competence. Like this is the way you are, and you've built a company that fits to who you are as a person to the best of its ability. So it's effortless for you to just be who you are.
I wish it were effortless, but I just make it look effortless. Yeah, maybe. I think I've, it's easy to look in hindsight and be like, oh, all the mistakes I've made have kind of set me up for this. And like, here I am, like talking like some big success or whatever. But like, I do feel at this point, even I wouldn't have said this a year ago, but I do feel like, the problems and the fundamental problems of the business are still as hard as they always were. But I think the fundamental problems of me are in a much better state than they were when we were at a Series A, Series B company. So here's my plug for coaching, like for CS watching this, it's like, try it. Like I didn't think it would have worked as well as it did. We worked together for 6 months, and then actually we decided to pause because I was like, I think I've figured a lot of stuff out. So we're kind of in this pause period right now. And like, one of my big hesitations was I didn't want to sign up for coaching forever, right? That kind of sounds like expensive and time consuming and all these things. And maybe I'll come back to it again, but like there are real investments you can make in yourself that aren't incredibly costly and aren't incredibly forever. And that I think can, in terms of founders, like you're always trying to find leverage, you're always trying to find that next gear. I think getting good at this stuff can help you find a next gear. And I'll have to do it again. Like this was the first transition. I think when when we pass 100 or 200 people, right, there's going to continue to be changes, but I don't know. Some people say it's not. So somebody says like that transition from 20 to 50 or 20 to 100 is kind of the big one. And then it's more of the same from there, but yeah, we'll see. I don't know. Hopefully I get to figure that out.
I'm sure you will. And I'm sure that it'll feel difficult at first, and you'll reconnect with who you are again and find out what your old skills really meant in that new situation. But I mean, I do get the sense that you want to teach things that you've learned to other founders, but you also want to acknowledge that things are still hard for you, and you don't want to paint this rosy picture of, oh, everything goes away with coaching or growth or whatnot. So
Yeah.
I really want you to speak to that. What is the biggest challenge on your mind right now?
I mean, fortunately for me, it's a lot of like the business challenges are the stuff which is where I want to be, right? Like I don't want to be focusing with my own demons and my own incompetencies constantly, right? I mean, I guess every problem with the business is downstream of some incompetency of mine, but like, for me now, it's like, okay, what are we going to do next year? Like how, who do I need on my team? What key decisions I have to make about like when do I hire which exec? Like what function do we need a leader for? Like how do we architect this? It's kind of at that level. I don't make a ton of like, I've got good people making the micro decisions now. And so I kind of get to, so those decisions are always hard. I think like also, you're always waiting for the next snowball to hit you in the back of the head kind of thing. Like you're just always the like thing that, somebody has to leave or quits or gets another job. Like that's always a problem. I will say like, as you get further along and like, you've got a more stable base of exec team and stuff like this, unless something crazy happens, like one person leaving becomes less and less of a tragedy, which is so helpful. Because in the early days, like if you lose somebody key, it can ruin your whole year, right? Like it can basically be like, oh, you wanted to have like time to hang out with your kids in the evening, and no, not anymore. Sorry. Like you're doing this job. I mean, literally that's how it is, right? Like as the founder, you have to step up and do it, right? Or you get really, then those things force you to like figure out how to find leverage and how to find help and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of like still the existential questions and problems never go away. Like, am I, those doubts you're talking about, like, am I the right person to lead this business? Am I the right person to lead this business if we go public, right? Am I fit for that? Like, honestly, I sometimes really don't think I am, but I know also I'm smart enough now to know that like, I won't know what that looks like until we get closer. Right. So I'm not worrying about it right now. Right. And just kind of, yeah, going back to the leaning into my instincts and trying to like, still just remember the fundamentals kind of always still work. Like, people, get the right people that you trust, build stuff people want, kind of just do that. The rest is like details. But yeah, I mean, certainly I'm still have a lot to learn in terms of managing a scaled organization. And we haven't failed. Like I haven't, fortunately, like knock on wood, we haven't been hit with major rifts like a lot of companies have. And like, I haven't had to go through navigate anything that messy and complex. I've been fortunate that our fundraising situation's pretty sorted. Like we have a good amount of money. Like I got a lot of like cards that I like lucked into. So there's founders out there that I know have a way worse deck or way worse hand than I have. So like, but I'm sure we'll have our day again. We'll have our year. That's tough again. And just being okay with that, I think, is part of it too. Just being like, yeah, it's good right now. it's going to not be good again, and
And
not
that's
like
okay.
get too worried about it. Yeah. Because
Yeah,
it'll get good again after that,
exactly.
you
And
know?
you also are now familiarized with the doubts and fear in your head, and you know, hey, like this is what to expect. I can almost pay less attention to it because you're almost talking about it. You know what? I'm going to have doubts. I don't know if I'm going to be fit, but let me choose. Let me choose what to focus my energy on. Let me focus on solving these business problems where it's energizing and probably a better use of my time than to answer the question of, am I good enough? Which is
Yeah.
very hard to
Really learning. Yeah. I mean, that skill, like learning how to let fires burn, you talk about it in the early days, but like, it's easy when it's like a bug or something. It's harder when it's like, a function, or something like this, where you have to be like, yeah, it probably needs some changes or work, but like, it's not going to be the thing that kills us in 2023. So like, I
Right.
shouldn't focus on it. And being able to do that in somewhat of a cold way, where you're like, you can, there's like not reacting, having an emotional response to something and then not reacting, choosing not to actually act on the reaction. And then like the level further is actually not even having the emotional reaction, right? Where you're like, you feel the spark and like the intuition that makes that thing a thing of concern, but you don't attach to
Right.
it in any way that makes it like, then you get your cortisol levels and like all these things that are really hard to control. There's like physical reactions.
Right.
That's when it gets really, I think that's helps it get easier, is like when you
Mhm.
don't attach those like emotional snap reactions to stuff, because the
Mm,
problems are the same with or without those, like,
right.
those things.
Yeah.
So I tell you, I'm grateful. Like I still get worked up like about stuff. Like it's my company. I care. Like there's still things
Right.
that I'm like, whatever. But like Peter from Segment has this great analogy. He's talked about like, roller coasters are really intense, like to people that don't ride roller coasters a lot. But he's like, if you live on a roller coaster, it's not intense anymore. He's like, it's just life. Right. And I think there is some truth to that. Like eventually you're just like, you're used to living on a roller coaster and you're just like, it doesn't give you that zero G feeling anymore. You're just like, yeah, it's just Tuesday, right? It's just Tuesday. So yeah.
That is I actually don't do any roller coasters at all. I
Really?
fun thing to imagine. But Jacob, I asked you a lot of questions. Is there a question that I didn't ask you yet that you really want to speak about?
No, I mean, you talked about it. You talked about it. And if it's like, if I'm giving advice, I'm an advice guy right now. Like, I do think there is going to be all this pressure and tendency and people that want to help you and they have good advice, and you should probably listen, but ultimately like they don't, and this is not even like unique advice, but ultimately they don't have to live it and do it every day. And
Yeah.
so like, don't, and I've made, I think this is one thing I've like, going back to like trusting my instincts, is like learning to tune out even the smartest people that are probably right, but it doesn't matter because they're not going to show up and do it every day. And if you don't believe in some choice you're making, like truly you're doing it because somebody else told you to do it, even if it's like the right decision for them, if it's not the right decision for you and your company, it's going to go poorly. Like just because you're not going to believe in it, you're not going to trust in it. I
Right.
think you're going to sabotage it in subtle, unconscious ways. And so if nothing else, that's like for a reason to follow your heart, if you will. Right.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. So cheesy, but so true. That's like one of the big.
It is like, as I get older, it's all about Hallmark cards. I'm now realizing that's really all, the lessons you learn in
Oh
kindergarten or
my
whatever.
Yeah,
So,
but it's like I tell some founders, it's all about the filter. You'll get so many books,
mhm.
so many frameworks, so many people giving you advice, so many things, and they're all helpful. But at the end of the day, you have to have a strong sense of value and a strong sense of direction in who you are to be able to pass it through the filter. Oh, does it resonate with me? Yes or no? Because at the end of the day, it's that filter that will help you make all of the decisions in your business, not really
Yeah.
what other people are saying.
Yeah. It's like I prefer to be the neophyte ignorant person sometimes. Like I'll read one blog post about something. Like I won't read 10, right? I'll read one. And if it sounds good to me, I'm done. Like I don't need to read the other 8, the other 10, right? Like I've got, it just, okay, it made sense to me. I'll read one book or the summary of one book. I don't need to read 10 books, right? Because I found like the polling, especially if you're a really attentive and curious person or whatever, like I can find it can be very dizzying, right? To like have all these like, oh, smart people, they disagree, blah, blah, blah. And like,
Right.
so yeah, sometimes just being a little simpler in your thoughts and more focused, I think can go a long way.
That
So
shows confidence to be able to
yeah,
say,
it goes back to that, right? Like just feeling like, yeah, I know it's maybe not the optimal, but like I feel good about it and I've seen enough and had enough success to know if I just do something I'm confident about, like it might not work out, but it's probably chance of that even if I read all the books, right? So like it doesn't matter.
there's another metaphor that says if you're looking for a wedding dress, don't bring more than like 2 people, because if you have 10
Oh
friends,
gosh, yeah.
like,
Oh, that's why I hate meetings.
yeah.
Like we have a staff meeting and I really love it. It's great. We need to have a staff meeting, but I think we all hate it because it's like we're all smart and good in small groups, but even like the best group of people, you put us all in a room and it's like, well, okay, there's a lot of voices. Like maybe this isn't the most productive.
Yeah.
So
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was awesome.
I'm really glad to do it. I'm glad to get a chance to reconnect and maybe, yeah, help some other founders
Oh, you
or
will.
whoever.